let's start the show, and I want to say welcome to those on who are watching us via Facebook and other social media. We want to say welcome to part 3 of our series on mental health. Our topic for discussion today, this Super Bowl Sunday, is trauma. So I will welcome first Mr. Steve Bole. Welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you.
Next, Steve is joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. Next, we want to welcome Ms. Nee Allison, who's joining us from the nation's capital.
Thank you.
From Philadelphia, Dave Ja, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Hey. Hello, everybody. I'm here.
And we have Professor Nancy Reeves joining us from Toronto, Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you for yet another edition of Focus on Liberia, continuing this mental health series on Super Bowl Sunday. Today is Sunday. I don't know, Dave follows Super Bowl very well. Dave, who's playing? What's your prediction?
I'm not too vested into it, but it's the Kansas City Chiefs are going against the 49ers of Los Angeles. Most of us on this side, we are to some extent rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs because their current coach, who used to, he was this coach for the Philadelphia Eagles some time ago, and he took Philadelphia to the Super Bowl at some point, but we did not win. So most of the folks on this side are rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs, and we are hoping that they win, and I think they will win.
There was a Liberian playing for that team. Is he still there?
I think he has retired. He used to be Tamba Ali, used to play for them as one of the linebackers or so. So I don't know if there's another Liberian playing for.
Oh yeah, that's Tamba Ali
again, but it was Tamba Ali from Lofa County.
Nancy, what's your prediction? You watch the Super Bowl? You watch football at all?
Why?
Yes.
Well, I hear my son shouting. I'm more into baseball than.
Okay. What about you, Nee?
Yeah.
No. Steve. You see, if I were not to ask the ladies, as I've been. Anyway, Steve, you. What's your prediction?
I think the 49ers will win today.
Okay, so that's east to west now. So the Westerners say the 49ers.
Is that your wish?
It's a coast-to-coast thing. That's what I'm hearing.
It look like it. All right.
Nee was very active in football when the Redskins were doing okay. But since they lost our RG3, she has lost interest.
I know, right?
That's what happened.
Yeah, but I think Andy Reeves is going to win it for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Okay.
I love also their quarterback Patrick Mahomes. I like his energy and I like his tenacity. But I'm also with the 49ers. If they win, I like Richard Sherman. He's a very good player. I like what he stands for. So,
yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. Now, that was our water cooler. Back to the show, and I will bring in Mr. Steve Bole to introduce the topic for the day. Mr. Bole. You are on mute, Mr. Bole. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Jai. Thank you so much. We want to say thanks to the Liberian people here watching us, those of you that have tuned in. As always, we like to remind you whenever we have the opportunity that you are the most important people. We also like to remind the Liberian women that they're the most beautiful women on earth, and that is a fact that cannot be debated. So that being said, tonight we are going to dive into our topics here tonight is trauma. We're going to be covering what trauma is, the categories or types of trauma, And we are going to be also discussing here some of the causes of trauma as well. Thank you so much, Mr. John.
Thank you, thank you. And so, trauma. What is trauma? And how is it perceived in our Liberian community? How do we look at it? What are some of the examples? So that's how we want to start the topic tonight. And let's go to Professor Reeves. I understand her PhD dissertation is on trauma. So why don't you start also with the definition, and then we go around the room. Each of you will kind of chime in and give us your input, and I'll be listening and learning.
That's very good, Dennis. Thank you so much. Yes, my PhD studies is in, or research is in trauma. I think after the Liberian Civil War and all the sort of atrocities that we witnessed, whether passive or active, when I decided to do my PhD, I said, having had my bachelor and master's in social work, I heard a lot of immigrants and refugees, especially war-affected individuals, complain that social workers or many social workers did not understand them. You know, their complaint was people spoke too many big English, and they could not really, and they had a lot of fear when they talked about their experiences and things that even some of them did, you know, like child soldiers. You can't even say that because it's a problem with that. But notwithstanding, they still had the pain, the anguish, the emotional aspect of going through the situations within them. So what are those situations now? I would say those are physical and emotional responses that individual experience based on their exposure to certain events. And as all of us know on this panel, one of the biggest events we've experienced for 14 years was the Liberian Civil War. But there can also be other issues in life in terms of abuse, violence, in terms of accidents, in terms of illness, in terms of the loss of a loved one, grief and bereavement. They can all be traumatizing, though it can be subjective based on the person and how they perceive the event. But in most cases, it is traumatizing. So I'll stop to that, and then you can go to the rest of the team.
Thank you. We're going around the room. Dave, what is trauma is our first question. After Dave, Nee, and then Steve will conclude on that.
Simply, a trauma is any disturbing experience that an individual may have, which task the individual emotionally and sometimes even physically, emotionally, physiologically, and impacts the person's life, maybe immediately or in the aftermath. So in other words, trauma, again, any experience, and especially disturbing experience that impacts an individual's life. But trauma also may manifest differently in other people, in people's life. Trauma may impact a person's life in a very debilitating way, or it may not for others. So that's just basically the working definition for trauma. Its impact, how it impacts people's lives. We will discuss that as we go along.
And do we have a elaborate definition, Nin, as you come in with what trauma is? Let's go ahead. If we have a elaborate definition of trauma.
I mean, I would say it's universal. like I'll piggyback on Nancy and Dave. It's a distressful or disturbing event that one we experience, and we related to the 1990 war, how um, distressful it was, how disturbing it was. We all experience trauma differently, traumatic events differently, and sometimes based on our past experiences, we respond differently to trauma. Um, among us, let's talk about some of the responses, some of the emotional signs that we experience post trauma. I remember during the war, I experienced a lot of sadness, anger. A part of it was denial, and fear. So those are different signs that those are different emotional signs that we all have when we experience a trauma. Some things you know is happening, but you get into denial and don't want to accept it. I guess out of fear, we remain in denial. And a couple of the things that lead to it, we have nightmares, difficulty sleeping, um, emotional outbursts. We have a lot of angers when we go through trauma. So it varies depending on the person and how they respond to the traumatic event they experience.
Steve, what is trauma and how common it is in our Liberian community?
Thank you, Mr. Jai. And as everyone else has said, when it comes to Liberia in relations to especially Liberians, I would say trauma is one of the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to Liberians. Whether it is the denial to accept the fact that just the fact that you experience civil war in itself is traumatic. Not not only talking about that, but most of our mothers, our daughters, our brothers, our sisters were somehow, some way molested or raped or violated to some extent. And so we come to understand that trauma in itself is a long lasting thing that has no cure. It can be managed, but it has no cure. So what that means in a Liberian context or Liberian sense will be, I know the very first time we had this show, we there was a caller that asked a question about Yeke Koluba. I'll say let me relate it to clarify here that we could say maybe the impact or the effect of trauma can be seen in most of the young people now, can be seen in majority of the older people, that someone will be touched or will be raped or will be violated, and people will say nothing about it. They will just say, oh, yeah, just leave it. Let's just talk about it. Or, they think, yeah, it been happening, the poor don't do anything about it. That alone is a sign of trauma within the Liberian context, where people ignore things, where people are hurting, people have no redress. People don't address the issues. They don't talk about it. They don't want to talk about it, shy away from it. That alone is an effect and is an impact of trauma. Or for people to even come on Facebook and I'll say curse each other out, fight, disrespect each other in public. That is a sign of trauma in itself. People are victims in different way, shape, and form. And last thing I want to add up is trauma will vary though based on the gender, the age, and also the experience, the traumatic experience. Thank you so much.
Dennis,
Dave, go ahead. And what I want you to add, we want to add also some of the signs of trauma we see in our community, both here in North America and also in Liberia. So whatever you're going to add, please, let's continue with that line.
Okay. Yes. You raised a question about our perception about trauma in Liberia, and I don't know if I'm not sure whether we know what really trauma is in Liberia. I don't know whether we have a name for it or we have an understanding of trauma. We have all the situations, the conditions that may cause, lead to traumatic experiences. But when I was in Liberia, I don't know whether we ever had any discussion, whether in family, amongst friends, or even on national TV, on through the national media, that we know something that is called trauma. We know bad experiences, but for it to be categorized as trauma, I don't know that, or whether we have that in our various dialects or languages as to what a trauma is. And so I think this is what makes this topic very, very interesting, because we 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 overlook the issue of trauma. These adverse experiences, we overlook them. We see them as a sign of being tough. We want for our children, our society to be tough, to be brave, to be fearless, which are good things. But the impact of all of those things, we seem not to understand them fully, because, as some of my colleagues have cited, the war for 14 years, the sound of guns, the level of violence against women, against children, the elderly, the fear, the intimidation, we maybe we take them for granted and don't come to appreciate or understand fully how such has impacted the nation. Um, so things like even childhood abuses, um, neglect, denying children food, or trying to punish them by refusing to give them food. These are forms of traumatic experiences that can impact the lives of people. And also in the long term, they have health consequences, they have emotional consequences, and they ultimately impact the livelihood of the people, and they impact the fundamental things of the country, such as the economy, the social cohesion, the academic functioning of the people, and also of the entire nation. And you wanted me to talk about what, the science, or?
But let Nancy address that question too, about as to because it's very important that you dug into that, as to really how traditionally we look at trauma. Is it a word in our Liberian languages? Is it something that we even talk about? Nancy?
Well, that sounds very interesting, because I have not heard about a word in Liberia specifically to trauma. But as part of my research in Sudan, the Darfur refugees they developed two concepts. And they call one of those concepts horizon and manju. They refer to them, and it expresses the intensity or the trauma. We talk about the lost boys and girls of Sudan.
Yeah.
And we know in that area, they experienced as much as 2.5 million displaced individuals, mostly children that has some severe traumatic impact. And the best ways these traditional healers work with them was to come up with these traditional names that they refer to as I said, those idiomatic expressions, Holzu and Manju, that they talked about. And it had to do with whether sleeping and shouting, or even wetting the bed, or even where the eyes goes really reddish, and fighting, and struggling to even speak when they think about the traumatic impact of walking from one village to another, and the people's parents being killed, and all of that. So they actually came up with those traditional words to be able to work with these children and help them express it. Now, whether we have come up with anything like that in Liberia, I don't know, but I think it would be a very good thing for us to see how kids or even others can be able to express the emotions from these sort of traumatic experiences in their own what we term as dialects or tribal languages. Now, this wonderful researcher in Botswana, they call her Banjili. She does a lot of indigenous research with women who've been traumatized by domestic violence, and she uses a lot of symbols, rooms, or you know, what you fan rice with the fanners and rocks and all of these to pass on to them that give them the opportunity to express their feelings in terms of what the experience that was traumatic. So yeah, there is traditional means for that. I don't know what we have come up with in Liberia, and maybe it's something we need to explore.
And we're going to explore it right here on Focus on Liberia.
Okay.
And I want our viewers to join in. If you have the name of trauma in your Liberian language, please post it on Facebook, and
Yes.
our panelists here will be discussing it. Or if you have any example of people discussing trauma in your village, please share that. So let me go to the question I was asking was some of the visible signs of trauma, things that we can look at that when you tell me now, I can say, oh, okay, so this is trauma. So let's describe or let's give some examples of trauma in our Liberian community that even our viewers watching us now can relate and say, oh, okay, I see why this is happening to me. Neil, let me bring you in there.
Okay. So, like I said before, some of the signs we see with trauma. You see, you talk about dizziness. It's a sign of physical trauma. Headaches. Sleep pattern, auto sleep pattern is another sign. Excuse me. Changes in appetite is another sign, physical sign of trauma. We can look at emotional signs, sadness, like I said, anger, denial, shame, all of those things. Those are signs of trauma.
So let's go to the causes, and Steve.
If I can add some there to that, Dennis.
Okay, I see. You want to add? I think Dave want to add, and Steve.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Let's
start with Nancy, and let's be very conversational. You can just talk from one person.
No, we're just adding. We're not being confrontational, right?
Oh no, yeah.
Conversational.
Conversational. Keeping a conversation. Yeah.
I think the feeling of withdrawal in isolation, and it happens to a lot of immigrants and refugees that come over. The research has shown that a lot of them withdraw, as a result of the shame and guilt. Take example, women who have been raped, it puts a lot of fear in them when it comes to socializing. I was at a place when I first came and completed my bachelor in social work. A social worker came over to me and said she found this beautiful apartment for a refugee lady from Somalia. She said, Nancy, the place is so beautiful. It's in the basement. It's wonderful. I don't know why this woman doesn't want this apartment. And I just looked at her and I said, do you know where this woman ran to when she was being raped in Somalia? Imagine the basement of a house. What does it remind you? That's the very bottom
of the trauma.
Yes, it's very traumatizing. And not only that, it talk about post-trauma, because she remembers, where she had to run in Somalia when these rebels and whosoever came to rape them. So that isolation is one part of it. That feeling of, we talked about it here before, emotional numbness. That feeling of emotional numbness, feeling of guilt, feeling of depression, feeling of sadness, you just lose a lot of interest. And the worst thing again for some of us who came from Liberia, culture shock. We've already missing home and have come into a new country where you've come without seeing your parents, your brothers, your sisters, but then you're also thinking about the experiences that you may have had. So you have trouble again remembering a lot of those dangerous experiences that you have, whether people being killed, people, being maimed, people being shuttled, no food, people dying, being on the dump site. So and that's what research on the Vietnamese, the war in Vietnam that happened was absolutely, trauma was also referred to as that sort of a shock that happened to military or veterans of that war. So it's like a shock. It absolutely shocks the body.
So that's a segue to the causes. What caused this trauma, and how we can recognize that. So what are some of the things that cause trauma, Steve?
Yes, Dave, just to Mr. Jai here, just to go back a little bit to what my colleagues have said when it comes to some of the signs and symptoms of trauma. I just want to attribute it to add up two more signs and symptoms of trauma that we see in Liberia now that are prevalent. Let's take, for example, when you hear people sing songs like "Your militants are ready to fight," that alone sends shock waves. It's a reminder for especially grown-up folks who heard rebels sing before they went to fight. Another sign that I've noticed with amongst the young people, and both within the opposition and the ruling party now in Liberia, you will see people wearing barracks hats with different colors, or some of them are dressed as dissidents. They're wearing khaki, or they're wearing fiti, or these different uniforms. It sends a lot of reminder physically when people see those things visually. It takes them back to those days when the rebels would come in different, camouflage hats, or whether that red or that blue or that different colors. These things, has the ability to revive some of their traumatic experiences they've lived in the past years. But let's go back to your question here about some of the signs and symptoms of trauma. Let's take, for example, if you have a little girl that will not tell you what is happening to her, but every time she sees that uncle that comes around, she either runs away, she hides herself, or she feels shy. Those can be signs that something is not right. Another sign could also be just the fact that some of our parents in America now, when they hear, let me use the word firecracker, they hear the firecracker sound. They get, or they hear huge noise. That alone, or they just lightning and things like that from the gun signs and other things. These are signs that are living, or let's say even women now. Some of the ways some of our mothers, our sisters, our wives, our nieces behave, even in a marriage, or the way they behave, the level of insecurity to some extent, is a sign of trauma, either from the past relationships or so forth. Or you will hear a woman tell you, will hear a typical Liberian woman tell you, when a man does not beat me, he doesn't show it. That's not a sign that he loves me. It's because they're used to those things. That's how they were either brought up, or violence, just violence in the home in front of the children. Those are all signs of trauma, or even abuse. The women and the men, they're verbally, they're abusing each other, they're cussing each other to the tail, going back and forth. Or the man slaps the woman, or the woman slaps the man in front of the children, or at home, they can't have a conversation. They're fighting back and forth. Those are all signs of trauma that are exhibited in our times. Like most recently, I was listening to a tape. Like I said last week, I was listening to a tape that's very troubling. I hear the police, who should be standing for our women, our mothers, our daughters. I hear the police, they were in judgment with a lady who is claiming that the policeman slept with her and couldn't pay her $150 Liberian dollars. that tells you that both parties right there, something is not right. Something is not right. And that was very troubling for me hearing that, understanding what it means to talk to people who have been through trauma, to provide help, to provide treatment to them. That alone, it sent a shocking wave. I thought that video was very disturbing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we've just been joined by my man, Asuni Sie. He loves politics, but sometimes he wants to listen to these things that are non-political. And Mr. Sie, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Mr. Jad, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm learning a lot.
Right, keep learning. And we posted the number if you want to join the conversation. We want you to learn from these great panelists, 605-313-6004. The code is 791403, and that's the code for every show. That's the number for every show. So please keep it and join the conversation. One question for you, our viewers: how do you call trauma in your local language? Or was there any time that the issue of trauma came up in your village, in your town, or in your yard? So let's discuss the causes now, some of the things that will cause trauma, and why you think we Liberians should care. I know we have talked about the war, so let's go a little deeper into that. Why will it cause trauma? Why, and other things that will cause trauma?
Okay, yes. Shall I speak?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. This is it. Let's disentangle it a little bit. Trauma is the event, is the experience. Is that severe and disturbing experience that a person undergoes or that a person experiences. It can be through abuse, which is physical. It can be through like sexual abuse. It can be through the perpetuation of violence against a person. Also, like the war is a traumatic experience. Like physically humiliating or beating on someone is a physical traumatic experience.
Dave, they beat us all the time in school. Teacher Pepper.
Yeah. We of course. Those are traumatic experiences. So we're going to get to that. So now the effect of trauma, it may manifest through what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. That's one. Another could be what some children experience is adjustment disorder, okay? Or disinhibited, like what Mr. Bole was talking about, that disinhibited social engagement disorder has the result of someone being physically beaten or punished. That person disengages from social interactions. So that can be an impact or an effect of trauma. So now we talk about it. For instance, now even Liberians that may be listening, something happened. In fact, maybe when you hear about the name Kakata, because of what you might have experienced in Kakata or on Kakata Highway, you start feeling jittery. Maybe your heart begins to pound. For me, for instance, I called a friend who wanted to get me a piece of land, and the guy said, the land I found is at 15 gate. The moment he told me 15 gate, I said, please avoid that. So, and part of the sign, a symptom of trauma is you try to avoid the places that are associated with your experience. You have flashbacks. For instance, some people go to sleep and they jump up from sleep in the middle of the night. They are jittery, they're sweating, their body is shivering. It could be a sign of PTSD. Okay, some children, they can't attach to other people. When they see someone, or they become too attached. It could be a sign or symptom of some traumatic experience, maybe abuse, maybe neglect. Some people, they distrust the whole world around themselves. They don't trust the world. If you start noticing a child that doesn't even trust elders or older people or anybody in general, it could be a result of also an adverse experience, maybe from their parents or from people that they look up to. Because if you were abused by someone, or if you were hurt by someone that you trusted, that was placed in your, that was to take care of you, what happened? You may begin to relate that, you generalize that experience that, hey, everybody, all older people, all adults are bad, because if I can experience this from this person that I've trusted, then it's a problem. Then I can't trust anybody. So trauma may manifest through a lot of other ways. And as you said, that some of us were beaten. Yeah, there are some people who may not develop maybe PTSD or the adjustment disorder or any traumatic. They may not develop the symptoms. They may not develop a disorder as the result of their abuses. For instance, most of us, we went through the war. Some people survive it. Some people survive it emotionally, but others did not. And there are a lot of other reasons for which some people may. Or some people are still carrying that experience or that hurt inside of them, and they have not reached the threshold where it will manifest into maybe a post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So that is it. But other people, it manifests in different ways, because there are some things that we call protective factors that we all have, and they will come from maybe the support we have, the kind of institutions that we attach to, our churches, our parents, our social groups, they support us, and then we may have also some financial support. But those who don't have all of those things and don't really fully adjust to that, they may develop those kind of disorders that are associated with with trauma. Okay, so we have trauma that we can get from violence, from sexual abuse, from neglect, from physical punishment, from verbal humiliation. All of those things may manifest into some form of a disorder, which may be, as I said, either PTSD, it may be social disengagement, and all of that. And if you start noticing yourself that you're not trusting people, you are frightened, you are jittery, you try to avoid places where those things happen, or sometimes, as Steve was saying, people wear these camouflage uniform, they wear those how they call them, beret, the red beret, and all of that. The moment somebody sees that, his heart pounds. Okay. I heard a story about the superintendent of Sino. He was in military fatigue, and he thought he was celebrating that he was made superintendent of Sino County. And upon his arrival in Greenville, they said people started to run in. Some people were running away into the bushes. That it could be a sign of PTSD, because they want to avoid the experience of that. And anything that is associated with that caused them a lot of distress.
Thank you, Dave.
So that's what I wanted to add to these professionals also.
Let me bring in Nancy before I allow our first caller, Aliu Kamara, to come in. Nancy, you have anything to add before we bring in our caller?
Well, Steve spoke on a lot of them there, but there's a few other things I would just allow there. That one thing, very practice, is very common to us, is bullying. We talk about kids going to school and being bullied. That can be very traumatic for certain children. We've heard a lot of them come home and end up killing themselves. We also looked at disasters, the natural disasters that happen, whether, earthquake, hurricane, and those other things. And Steve talked about early childhood trauma can be very disastrous in children's lives, especially issues when it comes to sexual molestations and things. Partner violence, domestic violence can be very traumatic. I have seen a lot of women who are living through that or who have lived through that, you know, and sometimes people have all sort of justifications and say, why can't you leave home or why X, Y, Z? There's so many reasons for why they will remain in those situations as traumatizing as it can be. But one of the main things we're discussing here, refugees. You know, during the Liberian Civil War, there were about 770,000 refugees that fled through the West African subregions and elsewhere. But then that's a single, what we term as acute trauma. But then when you fled from Liberia to Ivory Coast, and there was something going on in Cote d'Ivoire, and you had to flee from Cote d'Ivoire to another country, then it becomes a repetitive running around, and we see that more as, you know, very chronic. Then you have to pick up from Cote d'Ivoire into another place because, oh, the rebels coming and this happening. It just becomes complex. And there were a lot of people not only lost their lives, but experienced a lot of debilitating issues. And of course, the most common thing we know of terrorism. You know, it is traumatizing when you get into an airplane because you never know who's sitting there with something that could happen to you. Of course, the loss of a loved one can be very traumatizing for some individuals too. Yeah.
And just to add to some of the trauma, one thing we don't speak of mostly is medical trauma.
Yeah.
The responses of children and their family to pain, injury, serious accident, or a procedure that would be a life and death issue for a child, 50-50, invasive life threatening procedure, threatening treatment experiences, all of those can be trauma for the child
Like
or for the parents.
like
This example, I experienced medical trauma with my child, and it was a traumatic experience for me in the beginning, not knowing where to start from, how to go about it, until we kind of found out what was going on. So you experience that trauma because it's an everyday thing that you literally get up in the night and you're visualizing what's going to happen, what is going on, just confusion throughout. You have nightmares thinking, is it going to resolve? What happens, the magical question, what happens tomorrow when I get up? Is it going to go away or is it going to continue? Those are trauma that we experience for medical issues. I know we spoke about beating. You talk about being beaten when you're in school. When you look at child cruelty, like the child being afraid or timid after they've been kind of brutalized, I would say, because beating is a way of life in Liberia. It's spanking is for most times for good reason, discipline. But when it becomes a cruelty for the child where they are timid and timid towards the abuser, or they're just totally afraid, then it becomes cruelty, which is another traumatic trauma for the child. Some of the experiences that affect us, like sexual abuse, most times it's considered my fault. Like people are sexually abused and they are judged. Like if you had not done this, or you have not been in this position, or you have not worn this thing, this wouldn't have happened to you. So that traumatized a person. You already traumatized from having unwanted sexual gesture, then being blamed for what happened. It's a trauma by itself. So that puts you in a position where you have a lot of insecurity, lack of feelings, lack of self-worth for yourself, intense emotions, like being irritable. So all of those things, they are traumatizing to us. One thing I was going to mention, and I experienced it during my practice. One working with people that have already experienced trauma in their life. You then get re-traumatized from listening to it. I work with a person that came from Sierra Leone that went through the war, and I felt going through the war, I have experienced and I've seen everything that I needed to see. And just going through the intake, I got re-traumatized. Listening to it, it was like telling my story over. And for a minute, I just could not handle it at that point. And that's why I realized I was going through VT, vicarious traumatization, where you're helping somebody, but in the process, you get re-traumatized from that situation because you've experienced it previously.
Wow.
And that's something that I had to step back and say, I can't work with this person, because instead of working with them, I'm getting re-traumatized on this is my story, this is what I went through, and I don't want to relive it again.
Yeah. Thank you, Miss Allison.
Yes.
I'm getting re-traumatized now just by you mentioning that. So let's bring in one caller, Aliu Kamara. Aliu, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Anthony. I'm Sonny. I want to say thank you to the studio guests, the two guys in there, and especially to the two sweethearts, the two ladies. And please don't take an offense. I'm not being rude by calling you sweethearts. I'm an African man. We embrace our women. But Dennis and Sonny, I want to thank you guys ever so much for bringing up programs like these. My question to you before I actually go into the issue is, and maybe I should ask you these in the back room or so, but I ask you publicly anyways. Okay. Are you guys having any preparation to have these kind of very important shows broadcast in Liberia through other radio stations that go into the hinterland? Or do you guys already do that?
Yeah, that's our goal. We tried a year ago. Everything costs money. We are self-funded. So when we went to Liberia, there were people, they charge us, for them to have our show there on the radio or TV. And at this point, we are growing, and at that time we're not in a position to pay for it. So that's the issue we did. We call for people to donate so that they can help us at least on a monthly basis, and they were not asking for money. They were asking for $100 a month, but at that time we couldn't afford it.
Okay, I think that's this is one of the best times for the GoFundMe. We see a lot of unnecessary GoFundMes on social media. Yeah. But anyways, like I said, thank you ever so much for the show. As you could tell, my voice was a little bit shaky when I was talking. That is a sign of trauma. There are a couple of things I've experienced. I am not a psychology major, but I did it to a great length in college. So all of the people in the studio right there are much more abreast than I am. But I can only speak from the theoretical perspective. When people here start to shake, you ask them certain questions, and their head starts to shake. Their body starts to shiver. Sometimes they are unwarrantedly sweating. That is a sign of trauma. When people's voice starts shaking to a certain degree, that is a sign of trauma. And I'm saying this because I've experienced these in so many different ways, both in a social way and there's a so-called war. If you notice, most of my participations in political conversation, most things about NPFL makes me angry. It's not because I hate my fellow Liberians. It is because of my experience with the NPFL. My brother was asked to dig his own grave for whatever he had done. He dug his own grave. He stood over his grave, and they asked him to say his last words and say goodbye to his family. When he did that, they shot him, and he fell right in his own grave. Every time I think about that, I cannot get over the fact that somebody can do something like that. So it really, really gets, it might be small for some people, but it has followed me. Remember now, I was about 16 when I walked in, so that has followed me since the age of 1990. You know, and I have some other personal issues. Like our African parents need to understand. This is why we got to do GoFundMe for programs like this to go all over Liberia so our people can understand. Our people in Africa underestimate these things. Because of our exposure, our children do not have to go through what we went through, but the other people who are left behind would need to learn some of the things that we have learned. See, if you look, sometimes you see Aliyu Kamara, sometimes you see Aliyu Samba. My father is Samba. Never knew him. And when I got to know my father, I was first told about my father, I was already 31 years old. And so I made up my mind to find him. He had already died. Okay? And then I started to go back in memory lane and think about, our cultural setting. Me being from the Matingo background, if nobody knows your father, you are a bastard. And you don't have much to say in any gathering that tell you, man, shut up, man. Where your pa? You don't have a father. If you live in a situation where your stepfather kicks you out at 12 midnight and you are 9 years old and you sit in hallways and stuff like that at the age of 9, and then grow up to find out that when the day you find out you have a father, because there was a point in my life I actually thought women did not need to actually go with a man to get pregnant. I just thought, like sheep sometimes, women can get pregnant without a man. Because I had heard so much that I did not have a father to the point where I began to believe that I did not have a father. So I need some help, because sometimes when I think about my experiences in the past, that that gap was in there in my entire life, and the words that I heard and some of the action that I had to face as a result of that, the name of my mother can make me angry. And that is a sign that traumatic experience. And so I like to sign this caveat or maybe warning to men and women. When you have a child as a man, regardless of how much you hate or love that child's mother, even if you're not sure that the child is yours, it is very important to be a part of that child's life. It is very important to make sure that that child knows he or she has both parents. The women who conceive information from their children, let me just tell you from a practical experience, it hurts that child even when the child is 50 years. I'm 45 now, and I'm still angry at the fact that I could have known my father, I could have been around my father, but my mother refused to tell me who my father was till I was 31. Those questions will continue to play in the children's mind, regardless, even if they're 80 years old, unless the parents come out and actually explain to them why. But our African parents will tell you, well, you don't need him, you've made it, you're educated, you got money, but you didn't need him, you don't need him now, so why you worry about that? They don't care. They don't understand these psychological effects of stuff. So I just wanted to put it out there. Let us take these things seriously. And Steve, me and Dennis and Sonny, you guys need to do a little bit of this cash app thing. We give it to fully people, and they walk around, act like they're politicians, and put it in their pocket. What more about educated programs like these? So we're willing to get on board this shit. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank
Please
you.
stay around. I don't have Steve, pick it up because I can't talk now.
Thank you, Mr. Jai. Well, one of the things we have to understand is, I think earlier on, Nancy talked about it just a little bit. These are realistic things, and these are not joke. This is not one of your regular, maybe, cost the president, cost the people, do this. These are relatable things that even some of us on this panel have had personal experiences with some of these things. Like what Mr. Aliyu just said, I want to applaud him for opening up about his personal experience. That alone sends shocking waves. And everyone else that is watching and that will watch this podcast, we believe some way, somehow you'll be connected. This is not a religious thing. This is a fact base, that when someone speaks about their problem, you tend to connect some way, somehow, because either you have similar problem or you have worse problem or less problem than they've experienced. But one of the things I want to bring to the Liberian people's mind is this. For us to understand that Uganda went through similar things, probably experienced worst, because the Tutsi were going against another group of people. And that was a serious problem. Can you imagine people being killed? Like he said, his brother in a great, how to take his own grace, his last prayer. People were killed for no reason, all because you belong to a certain tribe. Now, one of the ways that they got over it was, as I was researching, I come to understand that they created an avenue to talk about things like these. Let me say this to the Liberian people. We must start to have these conversations. These realistic conversations that we must start to have. We cannot shy away from it as people. When we provide services to people who are not from Liberia, who have traumatic experiences, one of the things we do is we allow them to open up and talk about these things. We allow them to open up and talk about these things because these things are look, they haunt you for the rest of your life. They determine how you will live. They determine how you will behave. Look, I see some of our sisters, our mothers. It's not that they're bad women, even the men. It's not that they're bad men. It's just because some of the experiences they've had in life, they trust nobody. So at the end of the day, even when they're married, they start to trip at a certain point in time just by seeing certain things, hearing certain things. So it is important that we talk about these things. And so we will encourage everybody, let's share this thing. Let's come and talk about them. Let's come and express our experiences. Let's come and dive into it. That's one of the ways. Another way that they got over their trouble was they were supportive of one another. They were supportive. You see, in this country, we talk about something called bullying. I know people might think that word is a white people word, or white people thing, or civilized people thing. That is not truth. We see bullying going on right now as we speak on Facebook amongst Liberians. Something happens, instead of people talking about it and discussing it like mature people, intelligent people, as Liberians know they don't want to do it, people will come on Facebook and expose people's nakedness. Naked. Do you know what it means for you to take someone's naked picture and put it on Facebook? Do you know what that means? Do you know what it means? Do you know the impact of you? I was listening to the tip with let me switch this a little bit. I was listening to the tip with Moluba Molu calling another lady's name that the president has slept with. Do you know the psychological impact that has on that lady? Do you know what it does? Do you know how she feels? Do you know for the rest of her life how she will be? These are things that we must be conscious of. We must be able to sit and put aside. This is not a CDC thing. It's not an AMC thing. It's not an LP thing. It's not a UP thing. It's a Liberian thing. So we need to start approaching these things as Liberian. That being said, I want to say thank you, Mr. Jai.
Thank you. Dave, anything you want to say to Aliu? And
Dave?
Yeah, anything you want to say? And let me, Dave is my brother, so most of his experience in the war and my experience in the war are the same. We both lost our mother 33 years ago. And Dave was the one who was able to explain to me this year why I felt it so much, because, and so this traumatic experience, I mean, we can relate to them when it comes to the war. Somebody asked me, why are you angry? You know, we were writing on the list most of the time, and they said, oh, Dennis, you are angry with Warlord. You don't like Ellen. You don't like this. And I told them about the war and how it affected me. Imagine a young man coming out of high school at the age of 17, everything about you is book, and you have to sit down for 10 years on refugee camp playing Ludo, you know, and all from a refugee camp in Guinea, in Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Ghana. Just think about it. But up to now, what is it that we have done? When I work with Australia University, I have student account rep, taking people money. When the people come to register in their military fatigue, I want to run away from my desk. Yes, Ria, Dave, if you have anything to respond to Ali, I think we will be closing shortly on these notes. If we have to continue, we should.
Dennis, just one thing I wanted to add, piggyback on what Mr. Poli said. Listening to Alio, I empathize with the situation. And that's something that in our Liberian society, we find it difficult to see. People don't empathize with people when you're in situation. It becomes demeaning and they castigate you. And that's why people keep things to themselves. The first week when we spoke about mental health, we talked about the taboo in the Liberian society. Things are kept secret. They don't talk about it because everybody want to keep up their pride. People not willing to discuss things and be supportive of each other in a very good way. And, a lot of demonization that goes on. So when those things happen, people rather take it to the grave. They keep it in there and take it to the grave. And it affects the society. It affects those who are in the inner cycle. Like his situation, he said, no telling what was going on in his mother's mind. And she kept a lot of things to herself and did not communicate with him or others. So people don't want to be castigated, and they prefer keeping the pride and holding on to things and taking it to their grave. So those are some of the things. We talk about people going in Liberia, people don't keep, and there's no confidentiality. You say something to somebody, you walk out, the rest of the world hears it. Compared to our professional work in America, that's the first thing we sign when we meet people. Everything is confidential. So it's easy for people to pour all their heart and tell you exactly what's going on in their life because they know it's going to be kept there. It's not going anywhere. Back home, when you confide in somebody, the next minute it's all over. So it's like putting your whole life on the street. So there's no confidentiality, there's no privacy for others. So it becomes a problem for people to really feel comfortable to explain what's going on in their personal life with somebody. So they rather keep it to themselves and go in agree with it.
Thank you. Dave?
Yes, thank you again. Aliu, if you are still listening, look, I'm thankful to you for that courage to share your experience. I think that itself is healing. And I'm also so sorry about that experience of what you've gone through. And I can relate to your experience as well. Look, people, this is why I've always stated that people, you can build the bridges, you can hire all the bank governors on earth, build streets, build roads. If the emotional, psychological aspects of the nation, of the people, if they are not addressed, it's for nothing. And I mean it. And this is not really about being a student of psychology. That's not the reason. And when I came to this country, I said it again and again, I came to continue with biology and chemistry. But after I read few lines about psychology, about how people inherent disposition impact them and other people around them and their society, that's where I made that change. That again, what will cause Liberians, people who call themselves, oh, we are Liberian people, we are proud, we love ourselves, we love our country, for them to turn against one another for years and slaughter one another, humiliate one another, denigrate one another. And the sad thing about it, the unfortunate thing about it is this. After 14 years of destruction, nobody had the guts to turn around and say, how can we heal this nation? Emotionally, how can we do it? How can we heal these people that we have hurt? I went to exile in Guinea before we started having hearing about some Catholic folks started to talk about trauma that Liberians, refugees experience. And that was the time. And then a few other people just throw some light on it. But this could have been a national program to heal the nation, to heal the people. As Steve said, I was listening to a program from the Rwandese. The Rwandese developed national slogans, language, just to heal themselves. In their languages, they had some phrases, some catchwords that they will use that, like Rwanda is for Rwandese. We are one. We are one people. All I'm sorry about what has happened to you. But all of those things were brushed under the carpet, even if those politicians ever had carpets. They were all brushed aside. Nothing was done. And we thought that by having a political solution, by putting certain people in power, is going to heal the land. Now see what we got. A nation of traumatized people. And sometimes in Liberia, we think that if somebody is educated, they can't have mental illness. If someone has money, they can. But the trauma we are talking about today is also manifested in even government. There are some government officials that are carrying trauma around, and that is reflected in the way they interact with each other. Look at our House of Representatives. Even by somebody putting a motion on the floor is war. They want to fight. They are angry. Most of those things are due to traumatic experiences. So that people say if you are bitten by a snake, even a dead worm, you will be afraid of. So it could be by somebody just trying to challenge you or ask you a question, you view it as threatening. So this discussion that we are having tonight, and has one of the guys saying whether this thing is being broadcast across the nation, these are really essential things that we need to discuss over and over and see how well we can all be of impact. And national government should take the lead. It's not late yet. Liberia is a traumatized nation. I don't care how much medical treatment we put in, because there are some things that cannot be treated medically. We've heard our people when somebody goes to the hospital, say they can't find anything. Maybe they are right. They're not finding anything. Because some of the pains that you are feeling in your body, some of the heart issues may not be related to physical illness, but traumatic experiences. So this is a very essential topic. I'm very much happy to be part of this, to have these discussions. And a disclaimer, this discussion also may kind of induce some stressful experiences. We just want to remind you that if you are having some experiences, trying to relive some experiences, talk to someone, okay? Talk to someone, see one of your clinicians also, or call me after this, we can do some referrals, but it is very, very important that this kind of discussion should continue to go on for Liberians for us to create a high degree of awareness. Our people have been abused so much, women, children, we've been neglected. We've gone through a lot of experiences. And this is a very, very important discussion that we all need to be having all of the time. So I thank you again, the focus on Liberia family. Thank you so much for letting us share our thoughts and views.
Thank you. Nancy, before you come in, I have a caller on the line. And Flomo, I'm going to put you on the front page. You are afraid to pay 1 cent, so you call my line. They charge you 1 cent per minute. If you call that, I will send you for 10 minutes. I will send you the 10 cents. Yeah.
All right. Am I allowed not to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, there's a little bit of noise in the background, but I apologize for that. I just want to say thank you for this show and this topic. This is a very sensitive topic that we Liberians as a whole need to come and listen to this and learn from these experts, these students of psychologists. They are giving us knowledge, something that will heal our communities and also our nation as a whole. Okay, because we have to look at how Liberians have been making decisions in the past. most of our decision making are from the trauma that we have as Liberians. And for that reason, the decisions have not been made the right way. That's why we are here where we are today as a nation. I do have a question from the panelists.
Okay.
Trauma, as we are talking about today, is it a disease? One. Two, is it inherited or can it be inherited from our parents down to us? And one of your panelists, Steve, they said that trauma cannot be killed, but it can be managed. Okay, so I would like for him or other panelists to elaborate more on that part of it. So that, those three questions, if you can help me understand that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just to start off with it, trauma is not inherited. Like we said before, it's an emotional response to a distressful or disturbing situation or event. It's something you experience, and people process it differently. For example, both of us might be in the same situation, in the same place, and we see somebody being shot and killed. I might process it differently versus the way you process it. So it's a trauma that we will experience. So, and that's where it begins. Now, from there, you have emotional signs, you have physical signs, and all of those things that goes with trauma. So you cannot inherit it. It's something that you personally experience, and the way you deal with it or the way you process it, that's where that's how it's treated. So it doesn't go away. You have post-traumatic stress disorder, that the trauma, it repeats itself. You have nightmares, or you have different signs, emotions. You have some people experience anger. Some people are ashamed of it, and it's so many other reasons. Some people get depressed, anxiety, and some people that just disassociate with the whole thing. It's blocked up in their mind. They don't want to think, so they experience dissociative disorder from the trauma. I will stop right here and allow my colleague to continue from there.
So let me bring you in. Flomo, you can take your answer off the air. Flomo, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here listening. Yeah, so you want to go back to Facebook?
Please call your phone name again and you can take your answer off the air.
My name is Flomo Town Gibson. I hail from the great counties of Lofa and Bombay. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you, guys. I will join back to the Facebook Live. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy, your turn. Nancy? Are we having some problem there with Nancy's video? All right, Steve, go ahead and answer Flomo's questions.
I think those are beautiful questions, and I would have to agree with the other panelists who just spoke, saying that Miss Allison, when she alluded to the fact that these different experiences in the definition of trauma that she provided, I would like to add up to that as well. One of the things that we have to understand is traumatic experience, they vary from people to people. And earlier on, I think Nancy pointed out to the categories of trauma, wherein we have acute trauma, when people are exposed to it maybe for the very first time, it doesn't repeat itself, or chronic trauma, wherein more than one traumatic event, and then complex trauma, over and over and over and over and over again, different traumatic experiences. So that being said, in terms of PTSD and other things, most of the times when people hear the word PTSD, they think that it is just restricted or related to people who are in the army, or who are in the services, or people who've been through war and stuff like that. The truth of the matter is PTSD in itself, is a form of exhibiting trauma after the event, the signs and symptoms that we see maybe on a daily basis, how people live, how people act, how they react. But then when I like to come back to the part where he was concerned about, trauma, the treatment of trauma. Now there are several different methods or several different treatments. It stems down from medication to psychoeducation, or to even coming out to go into group therapy, one-on-one counseling, and all of those stuff. All of those are meant to be able to help you manage your traumatic experience, because trauma, it never goes away. It could subside or it could go down, but that doesn't mean that it go away. Because let's take, for example, if you had an experience, a traumatic experience, now it takes something to trigger those feelings or those emotions to come back into being. Like earlier on when we were talking, Brother Aliyu came on and said, based on the conversations we are having alone reminds him of some of his traumatic experience he's had over the years. So truly speaking, we can't say there is a cure for trauma, like, we give you this medication or you will come to this counseling and you will be done. Same for women. When women are raped or they're violated, what happens is that traumatic experience does not go away. All that has to happen is they either have to see a man that looks like that man that raped them before or violated them, or they have to see some kind of place, like Mr. Jar said earlier, like you were talking about 15 Gate. He couldn't afford to buy land in 15 Gate. One of the reasons was the events that happened in 15 Gate. So I don't care how much they sell the land cheap in 15 Gate or around 15 Gate area, he will not buy a land there, because you know what? It sends a shocking wave to him. So all of these things, we have to take them into context, and we have to put them together to be able to work with people who have trauma. And I will agree again with Mr. Jai when he said, as a disclaimer, I want to say this: we are not providing treatment on here, but we are trying to point out some of these things so that we can educate you. And should you need any kind of further treatment or to address some of these things, one of the very first recommendations we have for you is, call your doctor, call some of the hotlines that they have in the United States. You can reach out to Focus on Africa, say, one of these guys that were on there, one of these ladies, I would like to get in touch with them to see how best I can secure services from them and see how best we can move forward with this. But the truth about it is, it's very important for you to address your trauma as soon as possible. The sooner you do it, the better it will be for you. Find help, seek help. Trauma is not a shameful thing. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. I don't care how long you have had these experiences. Come out and talk about them. Seek help. The sooner you address them, the better it will be for you to move on in your life to address some things in your life as well. Thank you, Mr. Jar.
Thank you. Nancy, we'll bring you in as we draw down.
Yeah, I think I got an internet shock there, like some shell shock, right? So what was the question, Dennis?
We're concluding now. You heard from Aliyu, and then there was Flomo Gibson. And so let's conclude this whole topic on trauma. If there's anything we didn't cover that you want to touch on briefly, and then we can conclude so that Dave can go watch the Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, it's as everyone has said, all of the panelists, trauma is real. In certain situations, we cannot control ourselves from, as we said, in the situation with the Liberian Civil War, we didn't bring that upon ourselves. It came in, and a lot of people, went through that. But all the signs and symptoms we've talked about, those are things we are to be cognizant of, when individuals are experiencing it, the issue around fear and so forth. But some of the treatments, as Steve was talking about, one of the most important ones we use is the cognitive behavior therapy. And I told you on one or two of the shows here, when I hear the sound of gun, I've seen what guns can do. So that terrifies me. But I have learned to understanding that, okay, the first thing, I'm not in Liberia. The gun has been shot, not indiscriminately. But again, how do I say to myself that not every gun that is being shot out there is going to be shot at me? So we have to help people to think in a more positive way, to take away those negative dogmatic thoughts into something more positive, of course, people need to be exposed to some of the things that they are afraid. Get out there, try things, do some things. Instead of being isolated, socialize with people, go to church, of course, see your doctor, and have a thorough assessments done and whatnot. But the last thing I have to say here that is not as medical or so, it's more political. The civil war that went on in Liberia and Sierra Leone, some of the weapons I saw in that country were never manufactured in Liberia, neither in Sierra Leone. Most of those weapons were manufactured in the West. And this whole battle trade for arms, weapons, and natural resources prolongs these wars, escalate them, that we get to the stage of it becoming so traumatizing for a lot more people. I think as mental health specialists, psychologists, sociologists, social workers, anthropologists, economists, you name them, need to get together and say to governments, global governments, under this whole umbrella of globalization, that the production of these weapons to getting them into the hands of warlords should be brought to an end, because all they do is destroy the lives and properties and minds of people, sometimes forever. And that's what they got a very big good term that they call the political economy of war. And I call it global racism. That's what I term it. Because the people who are being killed with those guns for the exchange of weapons are all people that look like us. So the world doesn't care when the weapons are being poured in exchange for diamonds. So something else needs to do on the global political scene. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll be closing, so I just need to go around the room for 30 seconds each of your closing statement, starting with Ms. Allison.
Thank you, Dennis. Trauma is real, like we said, and it affects all range of ages. It's not specific to a particular age or gender. It depends on your experience, the event that occurred in your life. So, like Mr. Bole said, seek professional help when you feel you've been exposed to any trauma in your life. Seek a professional help and get it managed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to this, whether I can just speak for 30 seconds, but anyway, I'll try my best. But fellow viewers and Liberians, the impact of trauma is real, it's severe, and it impacts an entire nation. There is even research out there that those who are exposed to extreme stress over a period of time, they stand the chance of having heart diseases in their adulthood. Heart diseases, diabetes, and even psychological problems like depression, bipolar, and all of those things. So we should take these things seriously. Even children that are abused, that are neglected, those stressful conditions, they accumulate over and over, and over a period of time, it impacts their livelihood. In fact, people who are exposed to a lot of extreme stress, it impacts their cognitive ability, their ability to think, rationalize, make decisions. So if we don't take these things seriously, good. We are building a nation slowly and destroying a nation slowly. because those are the same children, the same young people that will have to compete with other kids from other societies, academically, politically, economically. Those are the ones. So if they are exposed to a lot of trauma, a lot of stressful conditions, they will not be able to compete academically. Liberia have had a sad history. And as one of our panelists was saying, that precarious trauma, just by listening to the story, just by hearing it on news also, it can also traumatize people. This is a country that has had political upheavals, 2 presidents killed, close to 500,000 people slaughtered. Those are devastating experiences that we need to take seriously. National government, national organizations, health organizations, political institutions, student groups, we all need to get actively involved, and the government should take the primary lead. And we in the profession are willing to share our ideas and our assistance. This is where I want to end. Thank you so much for letting me take more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, that was more. I will let Nancy go, and then Steve will conclude and talk about what we expect next.
Oh, well, thank you, Dennis. I think I went real political there in the last one, but you know what?
So I'm giving you another chance.
Yeah, politics. Politics is a part of our lives. And if you know, my research, I'm not just writing on trauma. I'm writing on the historical nature of the Liberian Civil War that led to this trauma. So I'm going as far back as 1804 to the return of the slaves, what happened and all of that. But notwithstanding, we have one phenomenon here to deal with, and that is trauma. And if anyone denied mental health issues, as we discussed on this show, you can't deny the fact that we can all be traumatized from issues that happen to us in our environment, right? And do we need to look at those things and see how best they can be treated? Absolutely. Otherwise, as everyone said, including Dave just said, what kind of community we will have. Social workers, a lot of us experience the vicarious trauma that we talked about. But one way I deal with mine, I just go out every year and present. I just present on whether my lived experience, the experience of people. That's how I try to get into it. And my research is on phenomenology, so that even opened me up to a lot more people's, experiences and other things. But there's a lot of work to be done here, and this is just the very beginning of it. My sincere prayer is that the Liberian government will listen to us, or listen to a lot of other Liberians, and we can all get in there and do something to help one another, because mental health issues is not one person issue. It's a lot of people's issues.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Jai. I'd like to take this time to appreciate everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much to our panelists. And again, thanks to the Liberian people. As always, they are the most important people. I want to say this to the government, to Liberians, and even our partners, whether they're donors or our friends or people we've had long sustaining relationships with over the years as a country. There is no way forward for Liberia if we cannot address our traumatic experiences, our mental health issues, our drug addictions, our substance abuse. No way forward. Give us good economy, we will spoil it because the mind is not right. When the mind is not right, you don't make right decisions. Bring new president, will create noise. Bring new House of Representatives, will create noise. Bring new Senate, we will create noise. It's a fact. People who are in the right mindset make right decisions. It is proven psychologically, it is proven scientifically, and it's a fact. It's a fact. We see other people thriving, they're not thriving. Look, let me say this, Mr. Jai. Prayers will not rescue us from this. We must come to reality that we need to address this thing and we need to take hold of it before it becomes the biggest epidemic we've ever seen in our lives as human beings in Liberia. That being said, I want to say for next week, we will try to link up trauma with abuse. Some of the abuses we've had, we'll try to link up trauma with some of the abuses we had. Some people have been abused in their life, both males and females. Some people have been touched when they were small. They never said it. Someone then said it, their parents said, shut up. Now, don't say that thing. When you say that thing, your uncle will get in trouble or the man will leave me. We're going to talk about some of those things next week. So we encourage you to bring some of your friends, invite some of your family members as well. Let's share the message. Let's share the news. This is free of charge. Come, let's have this discussion. Come with your questions, your concern. Come, let's talk about some of these things. I also want to use this opportunity to say, come the weekend of the March 14, the 13, 14, and 15, we will be in Washington, D.C. I will be there by the grace of God. And maybe one or two of our panelists will be there as well. We'll be there to the All Liberian Diaspora Conference. Please come on. If you have any question about it, reach me on Facebook. My name is Steve Bole. I will pass you some of the information. Come, let's talk about some of these things. Let's discuss some of these things in person. That being said, every Sunday we'll be here by the grace of God. Next week, we're expected to be here. The time will be announced. We'll pull up the time, check on our Facebook pages, check in with Focus on Liberia, as we will be announcing these things. I want to say thanks to Focus on Liberia family for giving an opportunity to discuss this thing as professionals, and let's continue to talk and do the right thing for the Liberian people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Panelists and our viewers. We're sorry we're not able to do more work on the phone and also the comments. I encourage you panelists, please go on Facebook. There are some questions here that we were not able to answer. One of us said those perpetrators are in power today. Another one said, what's the difference between mental illness and someone who is a psychopath? And there are some questions there. So please go and answer those questions at your convenience. I want to thank you once again for tuning in to our viewers, and thank you for your time. We're going to be having this again on Sunday, just as Steve has announced. Until then, we want to close with this song.
We are
people. Thank you, people. Okay, bye-bye, people. See you.